Welcome to this very first Educators Corner Question Time special with me, Vacher.
And me, Mark Steed.
We are following up on the live episode that we shared recently, which was a follow-up to the Reimagining Secondary Schooling conference, which we facilitated in January early this year. We had a huge number of questions during and after that live episode. So thank you to everybody who was asking questions during the episode and also in the LinkedIn comments afterwards. And we're really keen to continue the conversation going as we go beyond this episode. So, Mark, let's just jump straight into the questions that we've got from so many listeners around the world. And the first one is from Christina Astin, and she does a lot of work on partnerships. And the first couple of questions are going to be about online teaching. And I think what's been really clear, I think ever since COVID, that online teaching seems to have a very bad reputation. It might be improving slowly, but it does seem to have a bad rep. So the question from Christina, Mark, is, do you think that the bad reputation for online teaching and learning relates to the difficulty of peer interaction in this modality?
Well, I think I'll deal with the premise to start with. I think online teaching has improved quite significantly over the past couple of years, and since we've come out of COVID, I think people have been working on what good online teaching looks like. And when you look at what the King's Inter Highs and the Minervas and Sophia High Schools are doing, it's quantumly different from what the average teacher was doing during COVID. One of the challenges, and there are several challenges of remote teaching, online teaching. One of the challenges is student interaction, but it is possible to use breakout rooms. There's very clear channels of communication between individual students and the teacher. So I think that's a personalized experience is very strong. When you watch these lessons, teachers can really have conversations with students online in a way that they couldn't do in a classroom. But that peer interaction has to be set up and in a breakout room sort of way in order to do it. And of course, many students who are in online schools at the moment are school refusers. They have anxiety issues and so on. So that issue isn't going to go away and it isn't going to drive it. But I think part of the challenge, and one of the challenges is around that peer interaction. I don't know how you're finding it, Kai.
I think we both acknowledge that peer interaction, socialization is really important. And I think that is a challenge of a hybrid environment, but it's also an opportunity. If we think about hybrid environments creatively, then I think we can possibly improve opportunities for peer interaction and make it even stronger than it might be in a brick and mortar school. Now, that might be counterintuitive, but I think as we unfold our thinking around hybrid design, then colleagues around the world might help to understand why we might think that. So second question comes from Simon Luxford Moore. Simon, thank you. You were offering quite a few questions throughout the podcast and afterwards, and we really value your engagement. We're just going to pick up on one of your questions today. And your question, Simon, was, when students attend online lessons during class time, do they also need additional staffing? So Mark, I'll just jump in here straight away in terms of, we are and we have been doing this type of online learning in British School Slough, British School Muscat now for 7 years or so. And when we have more than three students in a class, we do think it's useful in our current way of operating online to have an adult in the classroom. Now, it doesn't need to be a teacher, but it just needs to be an adult who can maybe support the engagement of learning if there's a problem in the classroom, in the physical classroom where our students are. Maybe I should make that point straight away, that when we're offering online teaching in British School Muscat or British School Slough, the students are in school, they're in a classroom, they're usually in front of a laptop with headphones on. And the teacher's beaming into their laptop screen and into their headphones. And if there's a technical issue or an issue with that group of students in the classroom, we do think it is useful to have an adult other than the online teacher in that space to support the learning. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, the variables that seem to be coming out depends on the age of the children, the students. The younger, probably the more supervision that's required, and also the size of the class. So again, the bigger the class, the more supervision required. So I think if you're running remote teaching for in a class context, for GCSE or A level, IB, then it's probably more likely to work with very light supervision. Whereas if you're running it for Key Stage 3, it's going to be more complex.
Yep. Okay, yeah, light supervision. That's probably a good way to describe it. Okay, well, let's move on from online teaching. But if you've got further questions, you're listening out there, further questions about online teaching, online learning, then please add those questions to the comments in LinkedIn, and we'll keep the conversation going on online learning. Moving on now to the creative territory of hybrid school design. And if you've not had a chance yet to download the booklet, which we published after the conference in January, you can find it on the Steed Education website. You can find it on our LinkedIn channels. It's freely downloadable. There are many references and resources in that booklet, including a prototype design of a hybrid school that we've worked on with the architects Jessica and Wiles. And there's a great presentation by Ben Marston of Jessica and Wiles where he shares some really fascinating graphics of what a hybrid school might look like. So we're going to dig into that a bit now. First question comes from Suzanne Rogers, who is a curriculum architect. Suzanne asks, how are you thinking about subjects like art and design, where access to materials and physical processes is central to learning? What might art and design look like in our hybrid school, Mark?
Well, I think this is one of the areas where hybrid and online/remote teaching are very different animals, because in a hybrid school, students are in school for some, if not all, the week. A hybrid school is about delivery, whether it's in person, whether it's through a remote teacher, or whether it's personalized learning. So the anticipation that we both have when we're talking about hybrid schools is that there is some time in the week when students are in school. And then the interesting question comes is, how do we use the time, or how do we maximize the time that students have when they're in school? And I think two things are particularly important during that time. One is socialization. This is really important to have that human contact with other students and with teachers. And the second one is around practical subjects. So when Kai and I were working with Jessica and Wiles, we hit upon the general principle that if a lesson is taught in a standard classroom box, then that lesson lends itself more readily to being taught online than a practical subject. So when the design that we put in, and that Ben Marston and the fantastic team at Jessica and Wiles put together, focused on collaborative spaces for students to meet other students and interact with other students, but also on practical spaces. So it did have science labs and art studios and sports spaces and so on. So, and this model is sort of picked up by Dukes. I mean, Dukes are the sort of school in the UK that have pioneered this, and they're working remotely 4 days a week, and then they come in, I think it's on a Friday, into school, and on that day in school, they focus on the practical subjects, which is interesting when you do an analysis of the curriculum that Duke's offers versus the online schools. Duke's is able to offer practical options like drama in a way that the online schools can't. I don't know how you feel about it, Kai.
What I'm hoping is, as we design hybrid schools, that it means that subjects like art and design, drama, science practicals, sport, art, music, that because we are designing fewer, if you like, content delivery boxes, we'll be able to put more energy, creativity, and possibly even funding into those practical spaces. And so the practical subjects and the social spaces should be more dynamic, more exciting, more stimulating than what we might typically find in a school. So I think that links to a second question linked to hybrid school design from Neelam Amir, who says, how do you decide what deserves face-to-face time versus what can be effectively delivered online?
Well, I've sort of touched on that already. I think if it's taught in a box in the classic way, then it probably can be taught remotely quite well. That doesn't mean it's all got to be there. And in fact, one of the interesting projects I'm also involved in is working with Campus XR, which is a virtual reality company. And we're designing all the GCSE practicals in VR. So you could actually practically do hands-on, do the science experiments remotely. And I think that's a very exciting development and quite an exciting project. And if you think that's a sort of, if we're training eye surgeons to do eye surgery using VR, then we can certainly do GCSE and A-level practicals that way. So I'm quite excited by what can and can't be done in person. But human interaction, it's the tutorials, it's the space, it's the, when students literally and metaphorically bump up against each other. These are important experiences for young people in their development, in their socialization. And I think against that also, practical guidance really, we are looking at all alternative ways of doing science experiments, but it's great to be in a science lab with other students. It's great to be in discussion groups with other students as well, in person. We all know from online meetings that discussions are better when they're in person than when they're online.
Okay, so I think we've covered quite a lot of thinking there around, so there will be subjects that have a very strong practical focus. At the moment, we'd assume they would be in person, face to face, but already you're thinking that maybe even for some of those elements, as we develop AI and VR, then there might be also different ways of doing that. Let's look at the online piece, because I think that also. We shouldn't just make assumptions of just doing what we would normally do, but let's do it online. Because the learning that would happen online, that's maybe some of the more didactic, content-driven type learning, which you would find in quite a lot of subjects at some of the time, in science, in maths, in geography, in history, perhaps. And I guess there's a couple of things there that I'm thinking. One is that, first of all, that online bit, that could happen with students in school or at home. They don't need to be in the hybrid school for that, but many of them could be. So I think there's flexibility there. That gives flexibility in terms of whether students, how much students want to attend the hybrid school or not. But also, with that flexibility, I think we can think really creatively about how you might access that type of content, knowledge, understanding type of learning. And I think it's possible that if you've got a fantastic physics teacher, and we know they're in very short supply, that some of that learning could be one to many, one teacher to many, many students. It could be one to thousands for quite a chunk of that learning. So it could be a student at a desk or at their own little office space, a bit like I've seen pitches. I haven't ever been there, but I think High Tech High out in California, even 20 years ago, students had their own individual learning space, and they would access the online learning, maybe with a super physics teacher who could be teaching 20, 30,000 students at any one time. So that could be a different way of absorbing content. I mean, you've been quite interested, I think, in the emergence of how also that might happen with AI tutors. We're starting to hear about the Alpha School in the US, where there's, I think, students are accessing learning from AI tutors. I don't know how effective that is. I want to find out more about that. But combined with that you could really take that one-to-many model, like universities have traditionally done, and combine it with much smaller group tutorial work. So you could have, if you're in your hybrid school, you could have your practical, really engaging face-to-face community learning. You could have then a student learning online, maybe with his super physics teacher, with thousands of other students, and then also they might be going to a much smaller tutorial with 4 or 5 other students and a coach or a tutor who's supporting that learning. So it starts to really flex the design of schooling and how students might engage with that.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, we need to explore these different ways of doing things. And when I was a teacher a long time ago, I used to teach religious studies, and our skill base for GCSE was divided into knowledge, understanding, and evaluation. Other subjects have knowledge, understanding, and empathy, and these sorts of things. But knowledge, understanding, and evaluation are 3 really important levels. Knowledge transmission is really straightforward, and I think, to be honest, could be something that's pretty well automated. Basic understanding, again, could be part of an automated online flipped learning sort of process. But what I found when teaching religious studies is that you can't teach evaluation remotely. It was, I spent most of my lessons having discussions around whatever the ethical issue was, or that we were studying. And it was about students articulating deeper understanding and the higher skills of evaluation that I focused my time in lessons on. They could learn all the stuff. They could learn all the, what they needed to pass the GCSE, facts and figures, outside the classroom. And I think those principles apply to hybrid schools and to the use of contact time, whether that contact time is from a remote teacher or whether it's from a teacher in a classroom, especially the latter. And I think using how we use skills against, the scarce resource of teacher contact time is, I think, the matrix that we need to be working on here. So, knowledge transmission easily done, possibly even automated with a personalized tutor online, an AI-driven personalized tutor. But the deeper understanding, getting good arguments, teaching young people to think and to be critical and to come to a deeper understanding, that's going to take human contact.
Just a quick pause in the conversation. If you're finding this episode useful, it would mean a great deal if you could hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening. It helps more educators discover these conversations and tells us to keep creating them. So, if you haven't already, take a moment now to subscribe to the show. Let's get straight back into the discussion. So when we've defined what we think a hybrid school is so far in this journey, we've talked about a proportion of the learning being face-to-face, a proportion of the learning being online, and maybe a proportion of the learning being sort of independent, maybe AI, IT supported. I guess what the next question challenge is around that model is, this is from Elizabeth Asenso Agumang, who says schools must move beyond academic delivery and become environments that intentionally nurture well-being, belonging, and healthy human development. And you've started to touch on that there, Mark. But how might hybrid school design achieve that goal of intentionally nurturing well-being, belonging, and healthy human development?
Well, okay, so if you get rid of boxes, all the box classrooms, and you've got specialist spaces, what we really need are places of human interaction, collaboration spaces, slightly sort of downtime. I mean, think Starbucks cafe type thing. And the schools are moving this way. I mean, with the way we've been designing our sixth form centres for some time has been around a combination of collaboration and downtime, and recognizing that students will sit with a laptop on a sofa as much as they will sit at a study desk. So I think that sort of Starbucksification of learning has already happened. We just waste so much physical space building boxes. And I think when you've got a resource that is beyond that, when we're actually saying, well, okay, we need social spaces, we need quiet spaces, we need, sort of sensory rooms and all sorts of stuff. I mean, these are the exciting spaces that schools should be having, and access to those sorts of things in a position where which we don't have resources in terms of space and money to put in place at the moment.
So I'm going to borrow from your question, Elizabeth, and develop our definition of a third online, a third face-to-face, a third independent AI-supported study, and add to that definition within an environment that intentionally nurtures well-being, belonging, and healthy human development.
Yeah,
what do you think?
spot on. Yeah, I love it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So that just shows how this conversation, as it unfolds with inputs from around the world, is helping us shape what might be unfolding here. Now, this all sounds fantastic. I'm getting really excited. I always get excited when we think about hybrid school design in this creative way. If I'm thinking as an investor, well, I think this is something really I'd really like to invest in. Is this hybrid school design going to cost me more, less, or about the same as a traditional bricks and mortar school? Now, I know, Mark, you've done a huge amount of work on cost control in schools, particularly across the UK. You're building up quite a reputation for helping schools think very creatively and critically about how they are spending their money, and that's becoming, I think, an issue right across the world. So, hybrid, cheaper, more expensive, or about the same as a typical bricks and mortar school? What would you say?
Cheaper by a long way. I think for a number of reasons. I think having a proportion of teachers working remotely is significantly cheaper than having them in person, particularly if you're talking about working in an international context. A remote teacher, you don't have to pay all of the add-ons or the international package, the flights, the medical, the family, everything. So yeah, remote teaching as part of the mix is significantly cheaper in terms of cost. I think also if we work on a model where students are using the resources, I mean, I quite like the idea of a 2.5 day in, 2.5 day out model, with the option to be in doing personalized study. But if the 2.5 day in contact time model is the one we adopt, then the in-school bricks and mortar staff can do 2 shifts a week. They can see the A group through certain times of the week and the B group through in the other half of the week. So I think that becomes a very efficient use of teachers, very efficient use of space, and we can then come up with a much cheaper model for delivering education. And I think one of the I'm talking at a conference in a week or so's time, the IBSEF's conference, and one of the things I'm talking about is flexing into hybrid from being a bricks and mortar school as a way of effectively increasing your school role without actually probably having to build or add on additional or much additional capacity. So I think that will be quite an interesting one. So I've developed some ideas around how going hybrid might be a way to expand the size of your school at a reduced cost.
Okay, flexing into hybrid. That sounds like an interesting next chapter. How do we flex into hybrid? And I think we're probably we've flexed into hybrid more in Salala than we have here in Muscat, but we are starting to flex into hybrid a little bit here in Muscat with the introduction of A-level psychology online. And I've already got colleagues asking me, what's the next subject that's going to go online? Because psychology is going well so far. We've done it in year 12 this year, going to evolve into year 13 next year, another group in year 12. And then I've got colleagues saying, well, what about this subject and that subject? So I think that demonstrates maybe we're building confidence in the model as we flex into hybrid, and we're starting to change the mindset.
Well, of course, the other way of doing it is to flex. I mean, UK independent schools are in a real mess at the moment because the VAT, so they're having to look at ways to cut costs. So one way they're flexing into hybrid is to move some of their A-level low uptake subjects, typically languages, into online provision. So a student who's doing sort of maths, economics, and French at A-level might do maths and economics in person with their teacher and go to the library in order to do their French A-level.
Okay, and let's remember that this isn't just about reducing cost. By flexing into hybrid, we can create, or we can continue to offer, more personalised options for young people and extend opportunity or keep those opportunities open, as you've just described. And it creates flexible working opportunities for colleagues who want to work in education. And I don't think that's necessarily just a generational piece. I think right across the generations, I think a lot of people who would like to work with young people would value working in a more flexible way. So it's not just about cost cutting. It's also about maintaining and extending opportunity for young people. And it also provides flexible opportunities for staff, which I think there's a huge interest in. Okay, just a little bit about quality insurance. Rufus from King's Inter High, he's saying beyond the OEAS, that's the Online Education Accredited Scheme run by the DFE, which is a kitemark for online schools currently in the UK, what are the kitemarks would underpin the trust required to enable hybrid?
It's been really reassuring that the DFE back in 2023 put this scheme in place, and obviously schools have gone through that accreditation process. I know Minerva, I think, were the first one to go through it. King's Inter High Sophia High School were the first to do it, and then subsequently King's Inter High and Minerva have done it. And I think that's important. It's important that there is that DFE recognition. It's important that obviously the safeguarding aspects are in place. So I think what I'd like to see is sort of BSO accreditation of international schools. I'm sure that will come if it hasn't already. I'm not aware that it has yet, but I think that will be good. And I think alongside that, organisations like COBIS and BSME and so on are beginning to embrace the online school community, and that in itself will bring sort of regulation and the sharing of standards. But I think these schools are not sort of cowboy outfits. They're quality providers who are offering something different. And I know in the terms of regulations in the UK, there are some hurdles to overcome still around what attendance means, which is obviously a big issue for the British government at the moment, the DfE. Does it count if I'm attending an online school? At the moment, that debate is pretty fluid, and I don't think there's a conclusion come to it. But I think we are going to, over time, have a different view on what it means to be at school. And, one can be a regular attender of an online school, even though one isn't physically there. Hybrid obviously would have to have different criteria again. I don't know, where are you on all this, Kai?
Well, I think I'm very much aware that during COVID and coming out of COVID, a number of accreditors, for example, COBIS, and I know also myself as an HPL accreditor, they did flex into online accreditation of physical schools. So I don't see why organisations like COBIS, BSO, as an inspection framework, the accredited providers of the BSO, and HPL and all these organisations that do accredit schools, why, as they did in COVID, they couldn't flex their models and accredit online schools. I was really interested when I went to do an online, or when I did an online accreditation for the High Performance Learning Network, how much you could actually learn from a school by talking to students, staff, looking at documentation, all online. It was quite. I was quite surprised. And I've had quite a few conversations with Mark Hooley, who's set up as a global online education regulator. He's accredited more than 20 schools across the world, online schools in the last year or so. So he brings a global perspective to online accreditation. I think it is a really important aspect of this evolution of education. So it's great that the OEAS, the Online Education Accreditation Scheme, is out there. It's great that we know that accreditors can go online. It's great that people like Mark have set up organisations like Global Online Educator Regulator. But I think it is an area which will need to evolve just to help parents, students, schools gain even more confidence that these hybrid designed schools can deliver quality. A couple of questions left now, Mark. So one from Trevor Rowell. He asked a very short question, very pertinent. What can we learn from HE when it comes to hybrid school design? Thank you for your question, Trevor.
The issue around HE at the moment, as far as I understand it, is one of attendance or really non-attendance. And I think the traditional universities, bricks and mortar universities, are struggling to get students into lectures and to meet in person. So I think that needs to be borne in mind, that the danger of filming every lecture or every lesson is that people will watch remotely, even at a sort of enhanced speed, in order to do it more efficiently than meeting together. And I think universities need to look at how they want people to meet together. The mass lecture is an incredibly inefficient use of time when one builds it in travel. Students congregating together and bouncing off each other after a lecture over a cup of coffee are the really important bits of learning from university. So I think the questions around how we meet, how we use time, come back to what are we trying to teach? Are we just into knowledge transmission, or are we trying to foster deeper understanding? These, I think, are the important questions that we need to be examining when we try and look at HE. And I'm not sure HE's got this right at the moment. I think they know they haven't.
The bit that for me that sticks in my mind is a McKinsey survey from 2023, where McKinsey surveyed students from across the world who pretty much just come out of COVID online schools. And they asked them what they were thinking about online within an HE environment. And more than 60% of those students said they would like at least part of their degree course to be accessed online. So I think they could see in principle the value of the flexibility of online learning, even in a university HE space. But it comes down to quality, doesn't it? Quality of delivery and how that's done, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done two distance learning higher education courses. A whole degree I did distance learning with Ashridge Holt Business School, which I felt was brilliant in terms of the knowledge transmission, the understanding and directing and setting deadlines and so on. But in terms of tutorial interface, I think was limited until I got to the dissertation stage, where there was a lot more interaction with my tutor. And I did the Harvard Cyber Risk Management course, which was great fun. And that was a course of people all over the world. And the way they designed that course was much better because we had to interact. We had chat rooms. We had to interact with the debates on there, and we were assessed according to our interactions and debates on there. And I think that I felt I was doing that course with other people in the way that I didn't feel when I was doing the Ashridge course. So I think there are mechanisms here about how we set up and get an interaction for groups when studying remotely. And I think HE has done distance learning for a very long time, but it's good when you bring people together occasionally in the way that the OU used to do, or still does, I'm sure, with its summer schools and so on.
Okay, and I don't know how much training university lecturers get online, but it's certainly an issue we talked about in the online episode, which is available still on YouTube and Spotify. But we did discuss quite a lot in that live episode on the need for increasing the amount of training our teachers get, both in initial teacher training, but also once they are take up position in school. Right, final question from our good friend Peter Darby-Crook, who has been an international school principal, I think, ever since I was a student at school. He's a phenomenon across the international sector. So he's got a lot of experience, a huge amount of experience from all over the world. He's a great guy. And his question is this: the traditional secondary model is long overdue for a review. Why do we teach in subjects, and why are schools closed for half the year? We need more flexibility. So really that's a question and a statement. So Mark, final question of this episode. How will hybrid schools offer more flexibility for students and for staff, which Peter says we're desperately in need of?
Yes, and I think Peter's challenging the assumption of working within the traditional frameworks that we've got of, the examination framework particularly, which is, in all of these debates about the future of schooling, is the elephant in the room. I mean, we're still grappling with how we do it within the framework of delivering GCSE, A-level IB, or whatever. And I think that's a bigger debate about this. But I do think the hybrid debate opens up a really important discussion about how do we want to use time. The time we have with students is the most valuable resource. And it always has been, but we haven't used it as wisely and judiciously as we do when we start saying, okay, well, if you're going to only be in school half a week, or you're only going to be face-to-face half the week, what are you going to do during that time? And I think that's the really interesting debate that we're having at the moment, is around how do we make the most of the time that we have with students, because that's the magic piece. The rest of everything else is the management and, the running departments and everything is all there to support that magic that happens when teachers interact with students. So how are we going to use that time?
Okay, how do we make the most of the time we have with students? And I think on this journey that we've been on for the last couple of years, as we've been having these discussions and talking and learning from colleagues right around the world, what I think is clear to me is a hybrid school has the potential to provide more flexibility for students, more flexibility and personalisation for students, and it has the opportunity to provide more flexibility for staff. And you're thinking very confidently, Mark, it's also going to be cheaper. So what is there not to like about flexing into hybrid? I'm going to leave that question there. And if you've got your thoughts on that question, what is there not to like about flexing into hybrid? We're going to be continuing this discussion. On next face-to-face event is going to be on the 19th of January, 2027, very kindly hosted by Pearson at their headquarters on the Strand, right bang in central London, the day before the Bet Show. We've got the booklet that you can download. The past episodes you can watch on YouTube, on Spotify. For details about the conference, go to steededucation.com, Mark's website. We would love to hear from you. We would love you to continue or join in this conversation. It's a fascinating frontier that many of us, an increasing number of us, are starting to explore in education. Do you want to come along for the journey of discovery with us? Thank you, Mark, for joining us once again. Great to have you with us. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your energy. Thanks for your ideas. And we look forward to welcome you back to the Educator's Corner soon.
It's been great, as ever, Kai. It's always good to kick some ideas around with you.
Okay, take care. You've been listening to the Educator's Corner podcast with me, Kai Vacher. This show is created by British School Muscat and British School Salala, with post-production by Communicating for Impact. For updates and insights, remember, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Kai Pod News. Simply follow the link in the show notes to sign up.